Today I'm going to go through the process of connecting the OP-Z to Ableton Live. I want to take a song that I've created and be able to record both the MIDI and the audio from this into Ableton Live. For the audio, this only has one set of stereo outputs. So to be able to get isolated audio tracks, you have to jump through some hoops and really modify your workflow so that it's not a super painful process. What I mean by that is you have the option of muting each individual track and then maybe only unmuting one and having that playback and recording that. But there are some challenges with that kind of setup. How do you ensure that your timing is rock solid when you don't have a click track as a reference when you're just recording audio from each? It's pretty tedious to go through and mute and then unmute and go do all that type of stuff within the OP-Z itself. So I've come up with a workflow that I think works fine for me. So today I'm going to walk you through my process. One, how I connect the OP-Z and what the MIDI setup is on this device. And the connection is not just the USB MIDI connection, it's also the audio connection that you have to be smart about. Secondly, after we have a solid connection, there is a bit of a process about MIDI clock synchronization. But I think the process I'll walk through, you can apply it to most any other device to try to resolve your latency issues and to get a clean recording of stable MIDI notes and audio that is pretty much stable all the way through the sequence that you want. And then after synchronization has been established properly, I'll go and show you how I record in all of the MIDI performance data. So I have a quick way of capturing all that information from each track all in one recording. So that is a pretty efficient process. And then after that, I'll demonstrate how I plan on recording audio from each individual track. But I put a lot of thought into this and I hope that it's useful for you. This might be a little long, but if you're trying to work through some of the same problems that I'm having, it might be helpful. With that, I'll get started. First, let's go over the basics. The OP-Z is going to connect to my desktop computer through the USB-C cable it came with. And I'm just going to plug this directly into the USB-A input on my computer. I've had better results when turning off my MIDI, my USB MIDI interface when trying to connect the OP-Z to my desktop setup. So I found it was better to just plug in the OP-Z directly via USB. The other thing I have in this setup is the Mode 2 828 Firewire audio interface. So I'm not using the MIDI on this. I'm just using it for the ins and outs in audio. Another very important piece of information here when connecting this to an audio interface. One thing I've noticed, and this was true on the OP1 as well, is when you have a USB connection to your computer, where this is pulling some current from the USB, and then you connect the audio out into your audio interface, you may hear some noise, some digital noise and some hum. So that's a problem. That basically makes it so your audio is garbage and you need to clean it up somehow. So I found, so I did some research and I found this little device online. Basically, I think it grounds the signal so that it removes the hum and removes the garbage from the audio signal. And then I'm able to plug my 1/8 inch directly into that, and there's no noise now once I insert this in the little chain. If you have an OP1 and you've tried to connect this to an audio interface and other things, then you may have encountered the same problem. So just be aware. I've created a sequence of patterns on the OP-Z that I would like to record and copy over to Ableton Live. So there are a few things I need to do to prepare for the session file within the OP-Z before I start working with Ableton Live. So for one, the project that you're on, it's really important to save it. And so what I like to do is do a manual save. So if I hold P and track, let's see if I can do it with one hand, and hold it. Let's try that again. Project, hold, toggle autosave. Autosave is disabled now, and it basically saved the state of this project, which is great. I was starting to have some issues where some of the CC messages that Ableton Live was sending to the OP-Z was messing with the patterns I had put together on here. So it was becoming problematic and changing the settings where I didn't want it to. So better to start with a clean slate, save it, and don't let the things automatically overwrite it. So the other thing is all of the tracks so you need to set up some of the MIDI items. And so for this setup, tracks 1 through 8 here are also channels 1 through 8 here. So on this menu, you can change the MIDI channel for each track, but I've already set this up. So I'm gonna click track 1, track 2, 3, 4. So you get the picture there. And then for the global MIDI setup, these are the things I have here. MIDI in enable, MIDI out enable, clock in enable. I turn off clock out because I'm not going to use the clock from in the OP-Z when I'm connected to Ableton Live. And alt program change, I have this off. MIDI echo, you have this set to off as well. I'm not going to go really in depth here, but you can change all the MIDI CC items. So each one of these is a page. It's basically a representation of these 4 knobs. So 4 sets of 4 equals 16. So you have like 4 pages. Basically what you want to make sure is that CC1 is set to 1. And at least within the app here, you can change it. So you can change the number. This basically allows you to do custom MIDI CC assignments, which is really great when you're working with other external synthesizers, but it's not good when you go to work with another DAW, and if you're trying to record in MIDI performance data from the OP-Z into Ableton Live, it's going to record that in using CC1. But if you have this, if you had this set to say 30, for instance, Ableton Live is going to record it in as CC30. Then when Ableton Live plays back the MIDI data to the OP-Z, it's going to send it back as CC30, but you're not going to hear what you expect because the OP-Z is listening for that same performance data, assuming that it's going to be on CC1. So for me, it's super important that you basically reset all these to be 1 through 16 on each of the tracks. That way you can rest assured that that the performance data being recorded into Ableton Live and then sent back to the OP-Z is consistent. There is no confusion or crossing of wires. And at least for me, unless you do this, it will drive you crazy. You'll be wondering why your track is changing, why different things are happening that you didn't expect. So make sure this is set up properly. Now with the Motu 828, one thing that I've started to do is to use, I should have been doing this a long time ago, but using QMix FX. This software is actually super helpful, and I didn't realize it until I had the patience to set it up recently. This allows you to have pretty much latency-free monitoring. So if you're doing a performance on a piece of gear that's not within Ableton Live, chances are you might want to listen to it without it going through all of the audio inputs and processing of Ableton Live, because of that adds some additional milliseconds onto the signal, which can get kind of confusing and throw you off if you're doing if you're playing notes in. But for this exercise, we don't want to listen to the OP-Z through just the monitoring. We want to listen to it through Ableton's audio inputs. In this case, I'm going to mute the OP-Z inputs, and I'm going to go to Ableton Live. And I basically set up a session here. Now let's go over a couple things. I have OP-Z coming in from external inputs 1 and 2. 1 and 2 here have preamps, and this is important because I found if you just run the OP-Z through line inputs, it's pretty quiet, and so I had to give it like 14 decibels of gain here, which is not ideal in the software realm. I'd rather do it with the preamp and have a little bit more control around the input and then put a limiter on it. So why don't we just listen to what's coming through right now? Okay, so this is the OP-Z, max volume, coming in on channels 1 and 2. And at 0 dB here on the gain, it's actually pretty good. All right, so I have a pretty clean audio input coming into here. When you're setting up, so now, as you can see, I have OP-Z connected. You can see it in your preferences here, OP-Z, track on, remote on. I don't have sync on for some reason, and I don't have MIDI sync delay on the input. Sync type MIDI clock, okay. And then output, OP-Z, track is on, sync is on, remote is on. And MIDI clock sync delay is set to minus 81.5 milliseconds. For whatever reason, I set this to MIDI clock type pattern. I think because I didn't want Live to be sending any sort of absolute points within its timeline to get started on the OP-Z. I don't know if that makes sense to you or if it makes sense to me. Anyway, it works for what I need it to do. But I wanted to just pause for a second and let me just find an empty pattern. And so the trick with latency here is it's a little bit of whack-a-mole. It's tough to track down what's going on. You have to really sort of toy with the settings, and then you'll get it about as close as you can. Here, and this is my setup, I have the audio input track delay set to minus 17 milliseconds. So this is the audio input coming in. We're just going to try to focus on the clock, right? And so on the OP-Z, I'm going to turn on the volume on its clock, and then I'm going to press play. So the OP-Z is getting transport control from Live, right? So you can hear the click track from the OP-Z. And now, why don't we listen to the click from Live? So you can hear both of them together. They're pretty close. And here, let me close this. This is a little... So it's pretty close. Now what happens, so I have this at minus 81.5. What happens if, and this is at minus 17. What happens if I zero this? All right, you see there's a little bit of slippage on the timing. And if I go ahead 17 milliseconds, it's even farther off. If I go back this way, ooh, that's pretty close. That's pretty good. They sound like they're almost lockstep right now. So minus 32 here. But now let's zero this out again. If I go to MIDI clock sync delay here, and this is minus 81.5. So if I bring this back down to 0, we're off. So let's see how close we can get just adjusting this. Wow, that's pretty good. Now let's see. Now as soon as I press play, you'll notice that first beat is always off, and that's because Live is sending MIDI clock to the OP-Z, and the OP-Z is listening and only just suddenly catching up. So by the second or third beat, you'll notice that they're kind of in time. Yeah, so now they're kind of in time. Okay. So, so my settings here, I basically adjusted what I thought was already correct. But I guess in this case, this seems to work too. Okay, so now what do I want to do? Well, still the big issue is that first beat. You're never going to get it so that when you press play on Live, the OP-Z is going to start right on the same downbeat as Live. If somebody else knows a way to do that, please tell me, but I've never had any luck with that. On OP-Z, I basically set up one pattern, so it's just a simple 1 bar, 4 on the floor, kick drum. And I play that. I basically add that to the whole sequence. All right, so now I have an empty pattern here, and I just want something that's like 1 bar. So it's already kind of set to 1 bar. Let's choose a kick drum, choose track 1. Here, so you can hear that. So I've got, and now I'll just play 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's my click track. So now I want to set up the sequence so it has click track playing for 4 beats and then the rest of the sequence. So I will press the play button. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now when I press play, it should play this for 4 beats and then the rest of the sequence. Great. Okay, so that's working the way I want it to. You notice like the kick isn't perfectly in time with the click in Live. So I muted the click on the OP-Z. Now you hear just the kick drum and the click with Live. Let me see if my old settings kind of get closer. No? Okay. So as a test, I want to show you like, okay, how much latency are we talking about here? So let me record the audio from the OP-Z. I'll arm this track and we'll play. Okay, so now I understand why I had this track set to minus 17 milliseconds. So just ignore the first drum. This thing is always, let's see, that is like, the length of that is, what is it, like 134 milliseconds? I think you could see it over there. As opposed to, and it's lagging behind. Now all the other kicks you see here, here's like kick number 2. Now this is actually ahead. I know, it's super confusing, right? It's ahead by 19 milliseconds from the looks of it here. So it's ahead, it's behind, what is it? Well, 19 milliseconds, that's pretty close to the 17 milliseconds I had before. So if I want the audio I record to be pretty close to on the 1, then I'm going to make adjustments here. let's try minus 19 milliseconds. Let's see if that corrects it for me. No, not really. That really didn't do much of anything for me. So this is actually worse. It's like 24 seconds. Okay, so let me get this back to 17, minus 17 milliseconds. And then I'm going to go back in my settings, and I'm going to go to minus 81.5. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I did this before, and I spent, I think, a good hour or two trying to get this dialed in. And I think this gave me the closest result. Everybody's audio interface, computer, MIDI setup is different, so don't expect this to work for everybody. You have to, I would just, if you're trying to do this yourself, I would try to follow similar steps and use your audio recordings as a reference. Try to measure out stuff this way and to get as close as you can for latency. And I am by no means the authority on how to do this. This is just how it's worked for me. But if you have a better way to do this, please share it in the comments. So let's try this again now. Ooh, we're closer. So now look at the kick drum. Now we are off by about 13 milliseconds. But the good thing is it's off and it's sitting a little bit after the beat marker here. So that's kind of workable. Let's see what happens when I bring it back down to 0 on the track latency. This is mind-numbing. And all right, so now we still see a gap here. 13 milliseconds. So in some ways, it doesn't make a big difference. I mean, in a lot of ways, it doesn't really appear to make a difference. But let's see, can I dial it in even better on this? Let's take this down to like 77. Let's see what that does. Yeah, now it's 18 milliseconds off. So I think the settings that I had before, 81.5, they're not perfect, but it gets you really close. And that's about as good as I can ask for my setup. It's not a perfect pairing, the OP-Z or the OP-1 in Ableton Live. You kind of have to work around what their strengths and weaknesses are. Okay, so I have sync. That's pretty good. 81.5 minus 81.5 milliseconds, minus 17 here. Okay, that kind of works for me. And now what I want to do is I want to record the MIDI. Let's just say, all right, record the MIDI from each track on the OP-Z that has a performance. So this is a track I put together before and uploaded to YouTube. Just for reference, each one of these tracks, track 1 is MIDI from OP-Z, channel is 1 for track 1, monitor is set to in. Don't really worry about the audio. OP-Z track 2 here is using OP-Z MIDI channel 2 monitor in, so that's track 2 from the OP-Z. And on the OP-Z, I just set up each track to use the same sequence of MIDI channels. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 for the 8 audio tracks. So as long as I'm doing that, I can record the MIDI performance or the MIDI notes from each track separately. Before I go ahead and do that, what I need to do in the settings to, let me just arm record each of these things here. And then in the settings, warp record launch. This item start recording on scene launch. Set that to on. I think it's off by default. And what that allows you to do is, with each one of these tracks armed, if you press play over here to launch that scene, it'll start recording on each one. But before I do that, on the OP-Z, I want to sequence the chain of patterns that I want to record. So now I want to set up the sequence so it has click track playing for 4 beats and then the rest of the sequence. So I will press the play button. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now when I press play, it should play this for 4 beats and then the rest of the sequence. Great. Okay, so that's working the way I want it to. Like I said before, I want to start with that click track. So it's just 4 beats up front. That gives the OP-Z a chance to catch up to the MIDI clock that is being received from Ableton Live. And then by the time that the first 4 beats are done, everything should be in pretty good time so that I can get a clean recording of the performance into live. Let's listen. Cool. So you see MIDI coming in on the kick. Hasn't started on the snare and hi-hats yet. You can see the bass MIDI coming in. So the lead. And you can see the audio. You see this first kick drum here is a little late, and then every other kick is kind of right on the money. So that's what we want. That's why we have those 4 beats happening up front, and now I can rest assured that the timing is pretty tight for the rest of the recording when MIDI clock is coming from Ableton Live and the audio is playing back from the OP-Z. So it's about halfway through the sequence. I'll just let it run through, and you can see the snare drum here. You can see some percussion here. I think the next thing that we want to do is, all right, so I have the main stereo outs being recorded as audio from the OP-Z. That's great. All right, there's the kick drum all over again. So that's the end of the sequence. It just looped around. You can see on this, this is where those 4 kicks come back in. And on the front of the audio clip here, you can see that's where they started. And so where it says 2 here, that's where I want to set it to be on the 1. If I want a really clean loop, I'll change those loop points. But I don't want to do that yet. And I'll show you why. So one thing I want to do here is, so just to reiterate, this group of tracks is just for OP-Z like MIDI receive. And then there's this audio track. I just record the straight audio off of the OP-Z. So between all these tracks and the audio, I have a pretty good capture of like my main performance. I can go in and I can edit things via MIDI here. And now that it's in live, I can actually kind of give it different synths and sounds and add that to an arrangement. But I still haven't separated the audio tracks and recorded them separately in a way that I can take that into live and arrange it. There are a couple of ways to do it. one way to do it is to go in on, and basically you saw what I did here. I played through the 8 patterns that were chained together, and what I could do on the OP-Z is I could go and I could mute, I could solo just the one element that I want to record. So say I only want to record the kick drum for the 8 patterns. Well, I could do that, but it's a little bit tedious to go in and mute all the other tracks on the OP-Z. So I had a different idea. Now that this MIDI information is in live, and I have these OP-Z send instruments, I mentioned earlier in the video that it was important for me to separate the send and receive groups, because it just gets really crazy for me to be able to have send and receive of MIDI information on the same channel with the OP-Z. It's with the latency and everything, it just becomes a jumbled mess really quickly. I won't show it here, but you'll have to trust me on that. What I want is OP-Z's send group. I can take the MIDI clips here and I can send them back. So let me copy them from the receive tracks over to the send group. And now on the OP-Z, I'm going to go and I'll choose one pattern that has all the presets and everything for my sequence, pretty solid. Now that I'm in the send group, the important thing is make sure your monitor is set to off for each of these channels. If I only click on this track, it's only the kick drums. If I only play this back, it should only play the MIDI notes for the kick drum back. So let's click on this. And all I hear are the notes from the performance on the active track here. So it's only playing kick drum. Let's stop that and let's try the bass. Let's click this. Look at that. It's only playing the bass because this is the only MIDI clip I've been playing. So, well, I can kind of solo stuff out manually by doing that in Ableton Live, and it's a lot faster than going in and trying to mute each of the tracks on the OP-Z. You have to trust me on that one. And in addition to that, say I want to just do a combination of kick and bass. There we go. I just play the kick notes and the bass track. Now, let me just record. I can just let me show my audio track, and I'll arm this. Oops. So, I am now recording only the kick track audio. All right, and within here, let's see, how much latency do we have? Well, it's a little bit more than normal, but if you're paying attention to things, you can assume that latency is probably consistent across all the stuff that you're going to record as audio. So you can compensate for it, make adjustments to all your tracks in the same way. Let's see, I want to insert scene. And so, for instance, I could just name that kick. And then stop this. Let's show the bass. And so hit record. right, so the bass is recording. So, all right, so one thing to note is when you have all tracks muted on the OP-Z, you can't do the punch-in effects anymore. It won't affect anything. It's only strictly listening to the MIDI coming in from external sources. In this case, it's Ableton. So that seems like enough of the bass. Got plenty of material there. I'll get the rest of the melodic stuff by pressing play on each one of these, right? And stopping. And then I have the audio track armed. Now I have 3 tracks of isolated elements, all in time with each other. And I no longer want to be using the send group, so let me just think about this in terms of audio. So 1, 2, 3 new audio tracks. I'll make this kick, this bass, and this melodic. These 3 audio clips are ready to go into arrangement view. Let me paste these here. Now these just need a little bit of cleaning up. Let me set this loop start point to get rid of the first 4 kick drums, which is my reference click track. Now it's a 2-bar loop. Let me shrink this down to size, and now I should be able to duplicate it out. Great, kick drum, I can dupe. And then the bass, let me do the same. So I'll get rid of the first 4 beats, and then I will shrink this down to size. I think maybe let's make it a 4-bar loop. Now let me clean this up here in arrangement view, and now this should be ready to duplicate out. Let me just make sure it's super tight. Okay. Boom. Okay, 4. And then this, there are 2 variations here, so I want to first make sure I get the loop point right, get rid of the first 4 beats, set that as the 1. Let's see, maybe I'll loop this at the 17 mark, or maybe I will do it at the 9 marker, so 4 bars. So that's a 4-bar loop. Duplicate. And then I'm going to take this, zoom out, and find an interesting spot here. And then for kicks, I'm going to reverse this. And maybe I'll reverse this and reverse this. Okay, now I have made a pretty fast arrangement. Reverse the bass. So there you go. Once you have the audio clips in here, you can pretty quickly make these into an arrangement in Ableton's arrangement view and add effects, kind of add EQ, clean it up, do whatever you want. But it takes a few steps to get here. But once you have things, once you have your OP-Z set up correctly, and once you have your sessions set up the way you want to, you can transfer things pretty quickly and get a solid workflow going. So that's, in a nutshell, my workflow. I hope you were able to get something out of it. I spent a lot of time thinking about what might be the right way to deal with all the latency and to be able to have some material that can be edited and rearranged later on in live. I am kind of excited about what I can do with the track that I made on here, and then basically took some of the pieces from there, and now I can add a whole lot more to it with nice effects and new instruments and variations on the core of what I was doing here. Based on your feedback, I decided to put this video together, so please keep on leaving comments. I definitely pay attention to them, and it's been helpful for me to stay motivated. As I said in a previous video, I like to make these videos in a way that I use them as my own personal notes. So the idea is that I work through some of the technical challenges, and by walking through them and really thinking through them deeply, taking notes about them, I'm able to get through those hurdles and basically move into more of the creative realm, not worry so much about technical implementation later on. Like most things, you have to put a little bit of work into it ahead of time to get some rewards. So again, I hope this is useful to you. It may not be the best way to do things, but this is the way that I've worked around some of the challenges. I've put together some affiliate links that are in the video description. These are links to some cables and some MIDI interfaces that work, and some other stuff that might be useful to you when using the OP-Z. That's it for today. This is Microwaves TV.